Normally on the show, I don't like to do unboxing videos because, well, I find them to be kind of boring. And when Samurai Buyer reached out to us and said that they wanted to send a package in, I was afraid it was going to be a package of just a bunch of weird stuff from Japan, like candy and stuff, and I wouldn't be able to cover it on the show. But what they created was a brand new box called the GBA Retro Pack. And what this is a package of 5 GBA games that were used in a used GBA, and they just send it to you. It's kind of a neat idea, but how well does it work? Well, let's find out. When Samurai Buyer sent us this box, originally they sent us 10 games instead of 5. And the reason they did that was they wanted to show the variety of games that you could be getting at random when you pick this thing up yourself. But one thing we did get, which is kind of really cool, is the Spice Game Boy Advance. This is the orange one that we actually didn't get in North America, so that's pretty neat. But this is used. Now the whole body of it is actually in good condition and the battery pack's still on, which for many Game Boy fans out there, I think you know how much that can kind of suck if you lose one of those. But the only thing I'm not a big fan of is, well, this is the unbacklit version of the GBA, which I prefer the SP models myself, but this bottom screen here has a little bit of a scuff. And that scuff is a lot more evident when you're playing it when you have to hold this console up to a light. You never know what you're gonna get. You might get a GBA that's perfectly fine without any issues, but the one we had here did have a scratch on the screen. And although everything else worked really well, that's something to take into consideration. Like I said earlier, we had 10 games sent to us. Now, buyer beware on this front, because every game you're gonna see here, much like the GBA, is originally from Japan. So that means there's gonna be a bunch of games on here that you can't understand because they're in Japanese. But a couple of them, well, they actually do work quite well. Let's take a look. Like I said earlier, we got sent 10 games, and those 10 games are all from Japan, so they are gonna be in Japanese. Now for some of them, that's not gonna be an issue. We got Sonic Advance, and Sonic Advance gives you an English and Japanese option right as the game starts, meaning that this game is gonna be just as good as getting it in North America and being very easy to understand and play. But to be fair, you don't really need to know Japanese to play Sonic Advance. It's a really fun platforming game that takes everything you would have seen from Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and gives it a visual style that's more closer to Sonic Adventure. But that doesn't mean that every game that was sent in was something we could play, because unfortunately we got 3 games that were in Japanese and were very restrictive just because they were in that language. For example, Mega Man Battle Network 4 Blue Moon. Now this game easily would have been able to be played in English, but in Japanese there's a huge language barrier to entry because it plays more like an RPG and less like an older Mega Man style game. We also got Monster Farm Advance, which suffers from the exact same issues. And perhaps saddest of them all, Full Metal Alchemist Stray Rondo, a game that was never released outside of Japan, but unfortunately is only in Japanese. Regardless of the quality of those 3 games, if you can't understand Japanese, there's really not much you can do when you want to play them. But if you can understand Japanese, well, it's not going to be an issue for you whatsoever. The rest of the games included in the box are a whole bunch of games that don't really require you to know Japanese that much. Maybe you need to get through a menu here or there, and there's guides online for that, but regardless, I was able to get through without looking at anything online, and I felt pretty confident that everyone else could have a similar experience. For example, Wario Land 4 is a game you really don't need to know Japanese to play. All you need to do is start the game and it pretty much carries you through. And Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors is a really fun game to play, and even though the main menu's in English, the only elements that are in Japanese are the story and dialogue, which you can bypass because, well, you probably already know what happens in Dragon Ball Z if you're a fan of the show anyway. And if you are a fan of Dragon Ball Z and you haven't played Supersonic Warriors, you might want to give it a shot. It'll probably surprise you. Mario Kart Advance was also a game that was thrown into the box with everything else, and unfortunately that game utilizes a lot of Japanese. But because all of the menus have a lot of pictures and stuff, you can kind of figure out your way around things even if you don't look up a guide online. But come on, it's Super Mario Kart. Do you really need to know what everything says? That right there is Mario. You know that one means race, and obviously when you go to actually play the game, there's so little Japanese in anything that, well, it's easy to understand what's happening. It's a pretty straightforward game, and honestly, probably one of the best games they included in this box. And after that, if you still have a racing itch, F-Zero Maximum Velocity was thrown in here. Now this game utilizes basically no images for its main menu, and it has all text, but I was still able to find out where I wanted to go and what I needed to do to play the game. So overall, it still works pretty well. Now the last 2 games that were included are a little bit off for me, because even though I could play them, I really didn't enjoy my time. Naruto Ninja Council 2, well, I've never played the first one, and I don't think I ever really want to. The game didn't play very well, and it didn't feel like a really solid experience, and its reliance on Japanese made me not feel like I understood about anything that was going on, and even though Dragon Ball Z kinda had the same problem, I just enjoyed that game a lot more, because by comparison, Dragon Ball Z was just a far better fighting game. And the final game that was included was one I really didn't like, so I saved it till the end. This game's called Famista Advance, and it's from the Family Stadium series of baseball games that were very popular in Japan. And believe me folks, there are a lot of these games out there. Now unfortunately for folks that don't speak Japanese, you're gonna have a lot of problems setting up a baseball game because there are just so many menus to go through here and customize your match. And once you awkwardly bumble around through the menus and eventually do start a match, it is so difficult that you'll instantly want to stop. The graphics and animations are pretty solid, and the sound effects and music are also pretty good, but the game is completely unforgiving. And the hit detection on the baseball bat? Don't even tell me it's accurate, because I know it's not. And you will not be able to get any of your players, even if you do hit the ball in some magic way. Don't expect to get any of your players to home, because folks, that's a trip that ain't happening. I was so bad at this game that I was certain that it was because I just had no experience playing baseball games. So I looked at the history of the franchise just to see if the other games were as difficult, and guess what folks? The very first game in this series in North America was called RBI Baseball, released by Tengen on the NES, and I actually played that game a lot, and I was pretty good at it. But for some reason, whatever they did with this game was so bad they chose not to bring it anywhere else outside of Japan, so just keep that in mind. Anyway, regardless of how you might feel about the impressions I gave of these games, the games you get are gonna be wildly different. Heck, maybe you might even get the exact same games I got, but that's probably likely not gonna happen. There's a very good chance you're gonna get a couple games you won't be able to play because they're in Japanese, and there's also a chance you might just get complete RPGs right across the board. And this is something you really need to take into consideration if you're gonna get something like this. The prices range a little bit from the package of just games to the package with the console, but the price they're asking, well, it's gonna change and vary over time and from region to region that you want to get this from. So it might make a lot of sense if you want to get it, or it might not. For collectors that want to just get pure GBA consoles without a box or a manual or anything, this might be something worth getting. And if you want a whole bunch of games that are from Japan that you just get at random and you really don't know what you're gonna get, well, it might also be worth it that way as well. But because you're not actually getting any of the boxes or the manuals with anything, maybe as a collector that might not work for you. Personally, I just look at this set like it's a really cool package of games you can get and try out. And although a couple of the games I got I couldn't really play, which is a little bit unfortunate, the console itself I think offsets the value of anything you're actually buying because, well, that one system they sent in is something we couldn't get in North America or anywhere else beyond Japan, so that's kind of nice. But it is a risk, and I don't know if everyone wants to take that. But if you're willing to take the risk, you might find something very cool being sent to you in the mail.